Good morning. Welcome to a new week of CPD Leadership Development in Education Online. We've got fantastic lineup this week. Today we have Emma Darcy, which I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. We've got Dame Alison Peacock, who'll be looking at culture shift within our current time and moving forward. And then we've got Nadine Cotton on Friday, who will be looking at deep dives as a whole school approach in terms of the implications and how we deal with. So some fantastic sessions and a good variety of sessions, I think you'll agree, this week. And today's session, we have Emma Darcy, who is Director of Technology for Learning within the Chiltern Learning Trust, who has over the last few years been developing lots of different online strategies in terms of how do we as an organisation move forward in this new digital era. So today's title is Digital Transition, and we'll be looking at how we adapt in the current climate, and then how do we actually move forward with that as well. So we're going to now join Emma live after this session with Q&A. Now, for those of you that have been with us prior to today, you'll know that we have a Q&A which runs throughout the session, and then we will have Emma, and we'll also have Anton Beale, who's actually Director of ICT for Chiltern Learning Trust, who'll be dealing with a lot of the technical side of the questions that you may want to know about. After the video, we'll be looking at doing a live Q&A as we did before. Do upvote any questions that you do like, and make sure that if there's any additional points that you want to raise regarding any of the questions, and make sure you tag those into those questions that have already been asked. Every time you see a question that you like, thumbs up, and then what you need to do is make sure that you keep an eye on what questions are being answered afterwards. Emma will do her best to actually answer as much as she can. On Twitter today, we have got Simon James, who's Head of Computing at Puttridge High School, and he'll be dealing with a lot of the questions that we raised under hashtag LDeduchat, following the Chiltern TSA Twitter handle. So there'll be a live discussion going on, which will go from between 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock, and then it will continue after 10 o'clock, hopefully until about 11 o'clock today. So without any further delay, I'm now going to pass you over to Emma.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Emma Darcy. I am Director of Technology for Learning for the Chiltern Learning Trust and for Denby High School in Luton. And I'm going to be delivering a session for you this morning on digital transition. One of the things that I want to focus on here is how you can actually start creating your own digital transformation strategy. Now, I don't mean a digital strategy in terms of a refresh strategy. I don't mean in terms of, oh, you've got 15 computers in a room, when in the next 3 to 5 years are they going to be replaced. I'm talking about an actual strategy here that really focuses on embedding technology to support teaching and learning, to improve outcomes, to raise attainments, to support engagement, and where you can really see the benefits and the values and the difference to your learners. Now, I think the temptation at the moment with the situation we have in schools is to almost like be in danger of making snap decisions. There is a real danger of thinking that we've got to do things very quickly now. When we go back to school, when we finally get back into schools, let's make quick decisions, let's make quick changes. I'm really strongly going to advise you against that. I think the most important thing following what's happened and following this period of time that we've all had to spend outside of the normal school environment is going to be a period of reflection. It's going to be a period of time to really look back and think about what has worked well, what has been the biggest challenges, what are the things that you can take away and say, actually, yes, that was good, but we could have done better. In terms of starting with a digital transformation strategy, again, the starting point should not be what has happened now with COVID-19. That should absolutely not be the starting point for this. The starting point for a digital transformation strategy should always be, what do you want to achieve in your school? What are the priorities for your school? Now, it used to be very much, I think, that that education technology for learning, EdTech, whatever you want to call it, quite often became the preserve of a few teachers in school. And quite often it would be the ICT teachers or the computing teachers would be the ones who would be expected to know everything about technology. That is no longer the case. Now, one of the decisions that we made as a trust very early on was this idea that we wanted to introduce an element of consistency across all of our schools. It's very easy when you have a multi-academy trust to have schools that come in from lots and lots of different experiences and backgrounds with lots of different types of technology. And we knew that was going to be the case, and we didn't want to change that. But one of the things that we did decide to do within the Chiltern Learning Trust was to say that to ensure consistency, all of our schools needed to be using the same platform to begin with. So what we did was we decided to, after extensive research, that the platform that we were going to say that all our schools needed to be using was Google and G Suite, or Google Apps for Education, however you want to call it. The important thing I want to say at this point in the presentation is I'm not here to tell you how great I think Google is. I'm not here to get into a big discussion or an argument about the different providers of learning across the world. One of the things that we feel very strongly about, or that I feel very strongly about, is that if we are genuinely educating pupils for these jobs of the future, then we need to be looking at educating them to use a whole range of different platforms. Denby is not a Google school. I don't think of Denby as a Google school. Pupils at Denby will use Google. They will also use Microsoft. They will also use Apple products. And again, in terms of your own digital strategy, it's really important that you decide what is the right platform for you to use. Don't just use something because someone else is using it. Make sure that you choose the right platform for you based on what you want to get out of it. And what's been very, very useful for us in this difficult time of lockdown and this time of working from home has been the fact that obviously our network staff have control of all of the technology via their own G Suite admin consoles. And this has meant that if we wanted to lock a particular feature down for pupils or open something up, we've been able to do that centrally, and we can do that and we can maintain that overview of what's going on in all the different schools, or more importantly at the moment, what's going on in terms of home learning, and making sure that everything is kept very safe and secure. So I'm not going to talk any more about the trust now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on Denby High School in particular, because that's the school that I first went to work in when I joined the trust, which is 7 years ago now, and that is the school where I've probably seen closest the journey that the school has been on in terms of where they've got to now. Now, the point at which I joined the school and I joined the leadership team, like most schools, I don't think Denby was different to a lot of other schools out there. You'd got lots and lots of software installed on the school network that just wasn't being used. There was a lot of things that had been on there for years, but people still thought they needed it, so it sort of sat there. There'd been technology purchases made in the past with, every good intention, but that weren't being used as much as they should be. The school had a learning platform because every secondary school had been told they had to have a learning platform. So Denby had a learning platform, but it wasn't really being used to its full advantage. The network speed was quite slow at that time, and the Wi-Fi wasn't particularly strong, again, because not much technology for learning work was actually happening. So there hadn't been that previous requirement for network speeds to be fast and for the Wi-Fi to be strong. So obviously the most important thing for you is where we went from there, how things changed, what made a difference. And the biggest difference, the biggest change that was made first and foremost was the fact that the effective use of technology to support teaching and learning was made a school improvement priority. One of the most important things that I think you can do moving forward is to make sure that the use of technology, the effective use of technology, is incorporated into your school improvement plan. It shows, for starters, that as a school you take it seriously at the highest level. And if you as senior leaders are not going to prioritise the use of technology for learning, why should your staff? Why should your staff take this seriously if you don't do that? And I'm going to hand over now to Donna Neely-Hayes, who's the head teacher at Denby, to talk about how that strategy embedded itself as part of the culture at Denby.
I think looking back over our experience and our journey with technology, we've always thought technology was really important, and we've always had it as a priority. But it's now for us about a strategy, and it's about whole school improvement. So it doesn't sit aside as a bolt-on, or it doesn't sit as a add into a lesson just to tick a box. It's now very much about creating it as a culture and an ethos for the school, and that takes time and it takes planning and investment at all levels, but particularly from a senior level, to make sure that it sits on that school improvement priority with a specific role. it's not just about us leading from the top down, it's about also learning from the students. So our digital leaders would be a great example, where we know, the speed at which technology is moving on is something for a shared responsibility, and our students are absolutely ambassadors for that. So we learn a lot from them, and we also appreciate where technology is continuing to move forwards. And it is about, with all school improvement, it's about being ahead of the game and being able to see what the future means for technology in schools. I would say your first step is obviously to stop and look and reflect, like any strategy, where are we at the minute? What technology are we using in the school? Is it effective? And be brave about that. Don't feel, particularly when sometimes technology can cost a lot of money, just because it's cost a lot of money doesn't mean it's necessarily the right thing for you and your school. So stop and reflect on what's currently happening, but do that at all levels. Ask your students, ask your teachers, ask your parents. Then set your objectives. What is it that you want to achieve from using technology in your school? And be really clear about that, and don't feel that that's going to be achieved within the first half term or the first term. It takes time, but well thought out and well planned strategy around achieving your objectives is really, really crucial. Seek support and advice from other schools and establishments. What does the research say? And then bespoke it to your school so that you're confident in the pilot process that it's going to have a good effect. To the students, I think it's really brought them up to speed with technology in today's society. I think we better prepared them for their journey in school, but their journey onwards after school. They are digitally prepared. Some of the feedback with some of our technology projects is around the confidence, so students being more confident, not necessarily with the technology, but with their own learning because of the technology, and having that platform, like I say, as a tool. It's not replacing other things that we use within teaching and learning within the school. It's about enhancing what we already have. I'm really pleased with where I am at personally, but also how I'm leading technology within the school. And I think it's important actually at all levels to role model that, because if we're not engaging and embracing that technology, the expectation won't be there for others. But I'm really pleased with where we're at. As a leadership team, we now come to meetings without lots of paper, which saves money, which is great. But it's also, we're working smarter and more effectively because of our use of technology. So I'm really pleased with where we're at with that.
So as well as incorporating the effective use of technology as a school improvement priority, we made some other key decisions as well that made a real difference. And one of those was the decision not to renew the licence for the learning platform that we were using. After we'd done an amount of investigation into that, we found that although there was nothing wrong with the platform itself, staff were not using the functionality that were built into it. What they were using instead was they were using G Suite, which was part of the learning platform, and they actually didn't really need all the other things that came with the learning platform. So we actually stopped our subscription to that, and we moved everyone over to G Suite. The other thing that we decided to do was we decided that our initial focus with technology for learning would need to be on out of school learning, and the reason for that was we simply didn't have enough technology in the school to deliver it consistently right across the board. But what we did do was we did a pupil survey to really understand what access pupils had to technology at home. Now, a number of you will have done this going into lockdown, going into home learning. You will have done surveys to find out what access your pupils do have at home. And I think these sorts of surveys are really important, because I think it's very easy to make assumptions. You can think that you know your pupils, you can think you know the area that you're in, and you can assume what sort of access pupils have at home. The next thing that we did was we did an evaluation of all the hardware and software that we currently had available in school. And we took some hard decisions. We decided to retire software and hardware that was no longer fit for purpose. And then following on from that, what we did was we did a full audit of staff skills and confidence in using that technology. And that was not just teaching staff. I cannot stress to you strongly enough, if you're looking at any kind of digital transformation strategy, this must always include your support staff as well. So in terms of where we went from there, we also had a look at things that we could introduce as key initiatives to begin with that weren't actually going to cost the school a lot of money, because I know very few schools that will say that they have more than enough money and can do everything that they want to with it. A program that we introduced is something called Apps for Good. Now, this is a free program. It is an extremely good programme that encourages pupils to work in teams to create an app that solves a real world problem. Although there's a national competition and your pupils can enter their app idea into the national competition, whether they choose to do that or not, you can still engage with industry experts. And we found it incredibly beneficial at Denby to have experts from the tech industry actually dial in via Skype or Google Hangouts or Hangouts Meet as it is now, or Meet, and speak to pupils and give them advice and guidance about their app ideas. The programme itself also has led on to us having been able to offer some fantastic opportunities for our pupils, arrange the sort of opportunities that they would not have had otherwise, and I'll talk about those a little bit later on in this presentation. And then the final thing that we did was we decided that what we really wanted to do was to give pupils wider access to mobile devices. As I mentioned previously, we did have some mobile devices in school, different types, and there was nothing wrong with them. But we wanted to be able to broaden that out a bit more. What tended to happen is if a teacher was doing a lesson where they wanted to use technology, they would arrange to book out the devices from our resources, they would collect them before the lesson, they would be used in the lesson, and then they would be returned afterwards. And what we wanted to look at, we wanted to look at consistency, and we wanted to look at the impact of a more regular access to technology for those pupils. So what we did was we introduced our Chromebook pilot project. Now this was a project for 1 year where we took a middle ability year 7 group and we gave every pupil in that group access to a Chromebook. On the screen now you can see just how the Chromebook pilot project actually worked, and as I say, this was a pilot project for 1 year. Now this was some of the feedback that we received from that actual pilot project. This was coming back from the teachers who were teaching the pupils involved in the project, but also from the pupils themselves in terms of them saying the difference that it made to them. I'm sure there's a number of you for whom engagement for boys is sometimes a challenge, so this was a particularly welcome piece of feedback from this project. We're also correlating the progress data between the pupils in the group that had the Chromebooks and also between similar ability groups elsewhere in the year group who didn't have them. So we chose to do this project with Chromebooks. You could just as easily have used iPads or other types of mobile devices. And at the end of the project, what we really had was some very definitive conclusions that giving the pupils one-to-one access to a mobile device had a very positive impact on their learning. So obviously we were then left in the situation of where we kind of went from that point on. What did we do? Having found this out, how are we then going to move this forward? And I'm going to hand over now to Jess Pather, Deputy Head Teacher at Denby. She is currently the acting head teacher as Donna is on maternity leave. And Jess is going to explain to you a bit more about the thinking behind why we did the Chromebook pilot project and the impact that it had.
When we looked at what our students were engaging with at home out of school hours, there was quite a great engagement with things like GCSE Pod, for example, which had a real impact on results. And we wanted to find a way to bring all of those virtual learning platforms into the classroom and make that a part of routine culture and routine learning at Denby. So as part of our school improvement plan, under teaching and learning, one of the next steps was about the next steps in technology for learning and how were we going to approach that and what did it mean. So ideally, what we would have liked is for every student in the school to have a device at their fingertips to use whenever, wherever, within the school, outside of school, to enhance their learning experience. And that was the real seed and the real birth. In thinking about that took about a year really of real deep research, visiting other schools that had your bring your own device policy and looking at the pros and the cons of that. What were the advantages, what were their fallbacks, what did their policies look like, and then thinking about whether that was the way that we wanted to go at Denby and if that was the most suitable. And actually we decided that we were not going to go with bring your own device, but we were going to go with an opt-in scheme. There are benefits and there are challenges to both of those options and approaches. So if we begin with bring your own device and we look at the advantages of that, firstly, a child more than likely will have a device at home already, and so that would have no additional cost to a family. Secondly, because the device is owned by the child and used by the child, the functionality becomes easier because the student is used to that. So that's a time-saving matter, which was good. That's a positive. And also, it was a total responsibility of the student and the parents. So if it was theft or loss or damage, it was entirely up to the parent to take responsibility for. The downside of that was we had no hold and safeguarding, for one, because we didn't own the device. It wasn't ours to manage. Two, there was a difficulty with bring your own device, as in the variety of devices that we would have at a school. So some students would bring a laptop, some would bring an iPad, some would bring a LearnPad, some would bring a tablet, and that made it difficult for staff training on the functionality of a device and actually how you could incorporate it into learning. But most importantly, we wanted to guard against that from an unhealthy perspective of competition, an unhealthy competition between students, because it would be a focus on, well, who's got the better device and who's got the next generation. And what we wanted rather was the same device across the school, because the focus had to be on learning, not on the generation of technology. So when we looked at the opt-in scheme, it gave us all of the pluses that we were looking for. So first and foremost, it was about safeguarding. And through the opt-in scheme, because parents were leasing the device from the company via the school, we were able to secure the device with all of the firewalls and security that we could. So we were fully protecting our students inside and outside of the school. The device could only be accessed through school accounts. So obviously it was a very secure platform. It was, and all the areas for e-safety were fully investigated and fully thought about and covered. We also had kind of just the one style of device, and it became that culture of get your Chromebook out, and everybody had a Chromebook. In terms of the training aspect, it made it a lot easier and a lot more efficient, in that we were training a whole staff body on the use of one device. So it really was about an investment in time, an investment in research, and an investment in staff development to exploit the device fully, to be a really rich learning resource in the classroom.
Obviously, a very, very important thing was making sure that no pupil was at a disadvantage. So as part of that scheme, what we did, and this was an opt-in scheme, what we did as well was we made sure that any parent that chose not to purchase a Chromebook, any pupil that did not have a Chromebook, was also able then to access a Chromebook in the classroom from a bank of extra Chromebooks that we had for each department. We now have within the school, in terms of actual, nearly 550 Chromebooks in years 7, 8 and 9 that pupils have purchased themselves. And obviously in terms of capacity and what that allows us to do as a school, that's been incredible. It's also obviously had a huge impact at the moment in terms of home learning, because we've known very clearly in those year groups where pupils do have access to a device at home that is separate to, for example, the family desktop computer or someone's phone or another device, we know that pupil has got access to that device for learning. But I also said that there were lots of other opportunities, there were lots of other impacts and outcomes to come out of the use of technology for learning that we would never have perhaps thought of in the first place. I mentioned the Apps for Good programme, and one of the things that came out of Apps for Good for our pupils was the opportunity to speak more widely. So, for example, we had pupils that were invited to speak on stage at Wembley Arena as part of We Day UK, talking about the app that they've created to support young carers. We also had 2 pupils invited to speak on BBC World News. Now, this was in front of an audience of nearly 3 million people, and they were speaking live. So with regards to being able to really test out your oracy skills, this was a fantastic opportunity for those pupils. Now, I've shown some films as part of this presentation from the Chartered College of Teaching. The Chartered College of Teaching has 2 fantastic online courses using technology in evidence-based teaching and learning and leadership of educational technology in schools. And we were very fortunate in that they came into Film in Denby as part of those courses. If you have not signed up to those courses and you've not taken those courses before, I strongly recommend that you do so, because you will get to see some amazing pedagogy, not just from Denby, from schools all across the country, and it really, really will help you in terms of refining your own technology for learning strategy. Another thing that we're very proud of is that Denbigh was selected last year to be an EdTech 50 school. This is recognition of being one of the top 50 schools in the country for the use of education technology. The whole EdTech 50 movement is incredible. It's led by Ty Goddard and Ian Phillips, and there's a huge amount of work that goes on there in terms of sharing skills and expertise. And one of the ways when you're looking to develop your own technology for learning strategy, you can engage with the EdTech 50 schools list. You can see what other schools have been doing, and there's lots and lots of really great examples of effective pedagogy in that. Another resource that we can share with you that will hopefully be useful is the fact that Denbigh was selected by UNESCO and the United Nations as a worldwide best practice case study. This was in using mobile technology to support learners from disadvantaged backgrounds. I will put the link on Twitter after this session, and you will be able to go on there and you can read the full case study, which documents in lots of detail the process that we went through in terms of a sort of standing start to where we are now and the impact that that's had on our pupils. One of the things that's really nice about being part of a MultiAcademy Trust, and obviously I know you aren't all part of a MultiAcademy Trust, is the sharing of best practice, and the fact that what we've been able to do is cascade some of that practice from Denbigh across other schools, but also to learn from other schools in the Trust. Because everyone's using the same tools, the same technology, there are some amazing things happening in our schools, and it's always really exciting to learn something new from one of the other schools, to have something that can be taken back, can be shared more widely. And I think there's a real culture now of wanting to share things. This is one of the things that's really encouraging and that is really exciting, to be honest, about my role, is the fact that you get to see what is taking place across the schools, and they're being so innovative. There's so many new things happening. And another thing that I found very, very inspiring is the fact that obviously the current lockdown, the current situation with COVID-19 has really pulled pretty much all staff out of their comfort zones, and they've responded magnificently to that. Even staff that would previously have described themselves perhaps as being a little bit tech phobic have fully engaged with the platforms that they're using, because they know they have to make sure that high quality teaching and learning continues for the pupils. They've had to engage with that, and it's been really, really inspiring to see that happen. I think in this time of lockdown, what's made a real difference to us, the fact that these platforms were already in place for us, has been the fact that teachers have been able to have an ongoing dialogue with, an ongoing engagement with their pupils, even though those pupils are not in school. Before the Easter holidays, we sent round a parental survey to all the schools in the Trust, and the responses that came back from parents about what was working well, what were the most positive things that were coming out of that home learning, was the fact that there was still that ongoing feedback from the teachers. So when a pupil produces a piece of work, and it doesn't have to be a piece of work that's produced at a computer, you know, we're encouraging pupils to step away from technology, to make things, to build things, to go outside, to photograph things. But the important thing is that when they do a piece of work, they have a way in which they can actually submit it to their teachers, and their teachers will respond to them and will give them some feedback on what they've done. So what sort of things can you be doing right now whilst we're still in lockdown, whilst you're still at home? What sort of things can you be doing to be moving this forward? Well, the first thing that I would say is the fact that you're on this session today means that you're engaging with social media. I strongly recommend you continue with that. One of the best things that I found for my own personal professional development has been engaging with Twitter. There are so many educational experts on Twitter. You can go in there, you can really get yourself up to speed with latest developments. There's some amazing research, some incredible ideas, some fantastic resources that can be used in lessons. I have very much with my own home learning. I've been engaging with BBC Bite Size, with Oak Academy, and I think it's quite sad when you read people sort of criticising these sorts of resources, because they've been developed by other teachers in their own time, free of charge. They are there for you to use if you want them. If you don't choose to use them, don't use them. That's absolutely fine. But you need to go out there, you need to find what is right for you. So absolutely engaging with the latest research. The second thing that you can be doing at the moment is, like I say, surveys. Survey your pupils, survey your staff, survey your parents, find out how people are doing in this time. Find out everything that you can. Learn about the current context. What is working for people? What isn't working for people? Where do they feel the gaps are? I think one of the things that's very important is obviously when we do go back into school, there is going to be so much other things that people are going to have to work on that we might lose this really important bit of time that we have at the moment to be able to ask those questions, to move that knowledge forward. And then you'll be really, really well equipped. And there's no reason why you can't start having those conversations now. Start thinking about those conversations now. If you're a head teacher, if you're a senior leader, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? What is your school going to look like after this? What have you prioritised in the past that perhaps wasn't the best decision? What are the things that you found that have been invaluable to you whilst you've been away from school? And what are the things that have been really lacking for you? And you can use that then as a basis for developing your own technology for learning strategy. Look at your school improvement plan for the coming year. Does it have technology for learning in there? If not, why not? Surely this current situation has will hopefully have made even the most sort of technologically averse members of staff think that actually there is a really important role for technology to play in learning, not just inside school, but outside of school as well. So in terms of wrapping this presentation up, and obviously I'm going to be moving on to sort of taking questions from you shortly, and hopefully been engaging with some of the questions during this session. Now, where do we go from here? You know, where do we go from here? Where do all of us go from here? As I said at the start, I think the most important thing after this is to have a period of reflection and to take the time to do that. If I have any worries about where we're going to be following this situation, it's not with regards to the actual use of technology, because I know that that all schools will have moved on so much in terms of their engagement with technology. What concerns me when we do finally get to go back into school is that everyone's going to be so glad to be back in the classroom, so glad to actually having face-to-face contact with pupils again, that the danger might be that everyone decides that they want to actually step back from technology and not continue to incorporate it because they've been using it so much. And I think that would be a real mistake. I think that there's been so much learnt from this period of time, from this period of lockdown, from this period of home learning. And I think we do need to learn from that. We need to look at what's worked well. We need to look at what we need to improve. We need to look at how we need to continue to train and support our teachers. We need to make sure that we have properly well-developed technology for learning strategies for the next 3 to 5 years, not because we're expecting this sort of situation to happen again, although let's be honest, it could, but because we actually want to make sure moving forward that we are preparing our young people for those jobs of the future, that we are making sure that they are going to be properly rounded digital citizens, able to cope with whatever the world of the future throws at them. Thank you very much for listening.
Welcome back. That was, I think, a lot of points covered there, lots of different aspects in terms of the work that you've done, Emma, and some really good questions. I've got some from Twitter as well. But just before we move on, I just want to say a quick hi. I've got a couple of people, one that I recognise is currently in Saudi, and he's joined us. And then we've got Eric, who's from the UAE also. There's people from outside the UK. Just want to say hi to them. But Emma, just looking through the questions there, I'm going to pass over to you in terms of addressing some of the points that have been raised while that video was running.
Thank you very much, Arv, and morning everyone. Thank you for your time and attention during the film. I've got 3 questions that I picked up on here, and the first one was a question from Adrian Rogers, who I think is playing devil's advocate here very much as usual, saying Denby is a truly outstanding school, so one might argue the ground was fertile for your great strategy. So can you mention how you've been part of the school improvement journey at somewhere else? Now, the first thing I'm going to say with regards to this is I'm going to disagree with Adrian a bit here, because I would say that if you do try and introduce a strategy like this into a school that is outstanding, sometimes that can have just its own set of challenges and difficulties. One of them being that obviously if you have a school that is outstanding, sometimes it's very difficult to persuade people that there's a need to change. Because obviously if teaching and learning is outstanding and you're coming in with lots of new ideas and saying, oh, we should do this, this and this, sometimes that's harder. But I do know exactly where Adrian's coming from with this question, is that obviously not every school is like Denby. not every school is able to have sort of a role like mine as like a Director of Technology for Learning. Adrian asked me to mention the case of Chiltern Girls, which is another school in our trust, which has made the most amazing move from RI to outstanding in the last couple of years. Now, I'm not for 1 second going to claim this is down to the Technology for Learning work we've been doing in the school. This is an amazing school with amazing staff, amazing girls. But one of the things that Chiltern Girls did do that I think was really, really important was they put CPD at the heart of their digital transformation strategy. So one of the things that school did was very much look at how the use of technology could be supported by evidence-informed practice, but also by staff development and training. And so what they did was they very much made the work that I did with them about training up the staff. And we would be doing things like sort of high-impact teacher training sessions in the morning before school started. We would be doing departmental training sessions, and very much the focus was on making sure that staff knew how to use the technology effectively, so that they've then been able to help develop that strategy for the school as a whole. That's a school that uses iPads as well as other technologies. So again, coming from a very different context to Denby, but it's also had a really, really positive impact. So I hope that that answers your question, Adrian. The next question that I got on the list was a really, really good question here from Anne Palmer. So good morning, Anne. Yeah, Anne wrote, there's still the dichotomy between the GCSE exams, which are still focused on writing vast amounts and in a short period of time, and then the conflict with our forever digitalised society, and how do you address this? That is such a good question, Anne, and I think, being really honest, I think that we are at a major point of transition at the moment, and I don't mean because of what's happening with COVID-19. I mean the fact that I think we are seeing a shift from everything being handwritten to exams moving more online. I think this whole situation that we have with the GCSEs and the A-levels being cancelled this year is going to accelerate that, because obviously if we were able to do exams online, there was potentially a possibility we could still have done some of those. Don't get me wrong, writing is still incredibly important. At the moment, one of the hardest things for teachers is the fact pupils still need to be able to write. They still need to be able to write good quality work. But I think that in a school, what you have to do is you have to get the balance. You have to get the balance between, of course, they're still going to be using workbooks. Of course, they're still going to be writing. Of course, they're still going to be learning those core traditional skills. But alongside that, you need to be giving them a digital education as well. You need to be training them and supporting them to use digital technology, because that change is going to come. I think in the coming years, we are going to see more and more exams moving over to being online exams. So it is going to be very, very important that that schools are giving pupils the skills to be able to deal with that. But I think very much at the moment we are at that almost like crossover point, and it's another challenge for schools to have to work with on that one. Next question that I was going to move to is there was a question from Erin Corder, which was around what are the challenges when you adopt a digital transformation strategy. Obviously, there's lots of challenges, and they're all very school specific, depending on where you work. I think one of the biggest challenges, and one of the things I think is really, really important, is to get adoption at the highest level. I've spoken to lots of staff from schools that are not in the trust, people that I've bumped into at conferences and things like that, and they've said, I'd really like to be doing this in my school, but I can't get leadership team on board, or the head teacher doesn't agree with this, or something like that. And I think that is a real challenge. Where I've been really lucky is that within my role, I've been able to sit on the leadership team of the school, but also work with the head teachers across the other schools in the trust. And I strongly recommend that, if you're a head teacher or a senior leader out there watching this, that any kind of digital transformation strategy needs to be adopted at senior leadership team level. To start off with, I mentioned in the film about if you're not modelling best practice, if you're not showing how it should be done, why should your staff? And I think that helps then as well get around the problem of, quite often in schools you have pockets of expertise. You'll have certain staff who are really great at using particular types of technology that you might have, but then if they choose to move on, you lose those skills and expertise. And those might not necessarily be the people that anyway are going to leadership team meetings and seeing that sort of whole school perspective in terms of the challenges that your school faces as a whole. So I think it's really, really important to be very strategic about how you roll out strategy. Seems like obvious, obviously, but those decision makers, have it happening at leadership team level. Those people that are deploying that for you, pull them in to those leadership team meetings so that they can help support that as well. And you can speak very much from your school perspective as well of this. So
I would say that I think the starting point for is probably the most important aspect to consider as any organisation, in especially schools, in terms of what are they starting with, but also then really focus on where they want to end up, and then work back from that point where they want to end up. So you actually start looking at, how do I get to that point, and what infrastructure do I need to put in place? Because there's lots of layers in terms of how do you get from being in a non-digital, for example, environment to a more digital environment. And there's infrastructure issues, there's policy issues. I mean, we've seen, I think a couple of questions have come up. One of them was talking about the COVID situation and to do with safeguarding, in terms of that's really forced leaders to think about, how do we deal with safeguarding in this digital area? How do we keep our students safe? How do we keep our staff safe? So, and then thinking, what technology can we use to support those safeguarding policies moving forward? And this is really heightened that situation. So I think knowing what you've got and where you want to get to are probably the two key things that you need to start with. And I think every school has its own journey. I don't think there's one. I don't think there's one answer that would suit all people. So I think support in terms of what's achievable within your environment, I think definitely. And then somebody else has raised a question about, and I think that might be a good one to actually have a look at, in terms of where you've got challenges with students that come from more disadvantaged backgrounds, and your cohort. So I think it's Mac who said of how much importance does COVID-19 restrictions away from classrooms to be the growth where we've got children, where we've got low income sub-Saharan Africa he's talking about. Again, I think that reference could be made for any part where you've got a low income demographic around your school. How do you address that issue in terms of, and I was talking about the many layers, that is definitely that you can do all these wonderful things in school and have these wonderful protocols and applications, but if your children and parent can't access these, how do we bridge that gap so we make sure whatever we are doing that people benefit from? I think that'd be a good one to tackle.
Absolutely, I think that's such a crucial one. I think there was someone else who asked a similar question that I hopefully responded to a bit. I would go back to what I said about really knowing and understanding your pupils and your parents, because I think one of the things when we've sort of gone to this period of lockdown, one of the things that it has flagged up is where schools do know what access pupils have at home. And it's not just the access to devices, it's access to the internet. Because if all your resources are going online and your pupil's got a device but can't get online, you need to think about that. You need to think around that. You need to think about how you can work with that. And I would say that you can have the greatest plans for a strategy in the world, but if you don't have that information, if you don't know that, that's going to affect your rollout, whether you're in a disadvantaged area or not. And I think that you need to find out also, when we talk about devices, sometimes you can sort of think, what do we mean by a device? Do we mean a laptop? Do we mean something with a keyboard? Do we mean a desktop? Do we mean a tablet? Do we mean a phone? Because even in some cases, you've got you can do some of the online learning using a phone. If you're asking pupils, for example, my son's been doing the Lego 30-day challenge and sort of making different projects as part of that. You can then photograph that work and you can submit that if you've got the right infrastructure in school that allows that way of submitting work. But you also need to cost into your model support for those pupils that don't have access. And one of the things with the Chromebook scheme was we very much looked at those pupils that didn't choose to opt in or weren't able to opt in, and ways in which we could support them. So none of these are free answers. You are still going to have to make some form of investment in technology in your school, and in terms of like the wider picture, the global picture, one of the things that I do want to sort of steer that gentleman towards that asked the question about sort of sub-Saharan Africa and everything else. There's been some really interesting research going on at the moment that UNESCO has been doing for the last couple of years. I mean, I mentioned briefly the Denby case study. That is just one of a whole series of case studies that look at how technology for learning for the most disadvantaged learners has been introduced across the globe. And I think there's about 14, 15 different case studies now. You can go to the UNESCO website. I'll put the link on Twitter after this, and you can read individual case studies from across the globe about how that has been tackled in those areas.
Thank you for that, Emma. I said I think there's challenges that we knew about, and I think there's challenges that we don't know that we're going to face even moving forward now. And if we had a chance to do a test run of this situation, I think some of those points could have been addressed moving forward. But I mean, these are. I'm not going to use any of those cliche terms, but no matter how much planning had gone into a situation to prepare for something like this, I don't think we could have planned.
No, this is a new situation for everyone.
And a lot of the things that we've been talking about and trialing within schools are being thoroughly tested out now, live, without any kind of real dry run as such, because now they've gone from being discretionary in some aspects to actually being vital, and that's quite a big leap.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think going back to the thing earlier that I mentioned about how sometimes not exactly the blockers, but the challenges can be getting adoption at sort of senior leadership team level. I think this, if anything's come out of this awful situation, it's been at least the fact that hopefully schools for whom technology for learning and a technology for learning strategy perhaps wasn't a priority before, hopefully moving forward it will be now. And actually some of those senior leaders might be more receptive to those members of staff who want to go and have those conversations, have those discussions.
I'm just going to jump to another. Again, it's a similar thing, but not. It's to do with provision. I'm going to tie in a couple of things. The DfE announced about a week and a half ago that they were introducing a program to do with dealing with students that are from a disadvantaged background or have special educational needs, in terms of if they had broadband issues, that they were providing 4G routers and devices, etc. And somebody's asked a question here. Do you think there are adequate provisions for our SEND students with regards to use of technology? From our science department meetings, from some students who had some difficulties with accessing online resources, and that's from Regina. So I think there's been a couple of issues, and I think when I've had a look online on Twitter, there's been quite a lot of discussion about the most vulnerable being left even further behind, and some of that's to do with not having adequate support while they're using, because parents, etc., may not also be experts in this field, and then also they've got device issues, and some of them don't have the capacity to be able to do all of that at home or away from the classroom. So how do we address that so the people that are the most vulnerable don't fall even further behind?
I think that's a really good question, Arvin. I think that there's two parts to that question, because sometimes I think the dangerous thing that, because they're disadvantaged, they need a device. Let's give them a device and then everything's solved and everything's great. That's not necessarily the case. That might be part of the issue, but obviously, as I mentioned earlier, it's the thing about have they got access to the internet at home? And so obviously you have to provide that. Now I know with the scheme, obviously there's the provision for that as well. But I know the discussions we've had within the trust about this scheme is that very much also you've got to be thinking about safeguarding and security. If you're suddenly giving one of these pupils internet access on a device at home, how can you make sure that is secure? And I think again that comes back to the conversation about what platform and infrastructure you're going to use overall to manage your online learning. And like I say, it can be Microsoft Teams, it can be Google, it can be Apple, it can be whatever. But you need to make sure that from the admin point of view, that when a pupil logs in using their school login details, they are going into a very safe online environment, no matter what device or what platform they're accessing that on. So that thought's got to go in at the highest level in terms of the infrastructure that's being used, not just here's a laptop, all of a sudden you're enabled because you're going online. I think the second thing when we talk about SEN pupils is accessibility on a different level in terms of for example, if you have a child who is dyslexic and needs to access like a sort of specialist overlay so that the screen will be more visible for them, or a pupil with sight issues who needs to see the text much larger. I think the other thing you have to do when you're looking at your platforms is look at the functionality that's built in that supports SEN pupils with that. So again, I know that Microsoft and Google and Apple have functionality built into those platforms that you can turn on at the sort of top admin level, that then means pupils can access extra features that make using that device and using that platform much easier for them. And I think that's where your key workers in school are really important. You know, where you've got those members of staff who, your TAs, people who, your SEN department who work with those pupils on a regular basis, they will be able to help you and advise you and work with those pupils to make sure that you're setting that technology up in a way that is not going to leave that pupil further behind.
Thank you, Emma. And I think these conversations could probably go on for a very long time. As I said, some of them are very, very contextualised. So people in different schools, leaders in different schools, are going to have their own sets of challenges and how they're going to address those challenges. I think that's something that I think the key takeaway from, especially to do with students from say lower incomes and with who are disadvantaged or have special educational needs in some form, that have an issue with access for whatever reason that might be. I think the key thing is that dialogue between the school and those parents or those carers needs to be open to see what's the best way forward, and do it from that point of view. Unlike, I mean, as you said at the beginning, give them a device and that solves the problem. It doesn't. And quite often it's seen as an easy fix, but actually it's not a fix. And sometimes it can add another layer of complexity when additional supports are not put in place, or the thoughts not put in place in terms of how is that going to impact that student.
There were a couple of questions. There was one that I just wanted to pick up on from Marcus Rain. Marcus Ray, sorry, Marcus. It's because I'm trying to read
the ITT question.
And Marcus was asking about have I ever seen a Chromebook structure working well within a primary provider. One of the things that if we'd been open as a school today, we were going to have a visit from LDeduchat Trust, and I know they do some fantastic work with Chromebooks at the moment, so that's definitely, and that's I think fully primary MultiAcademy Trust, so they're definitely worth having a look at, and they're very, very active on Twitter. And Ruby has asked the question about how ICT strategy has helped schools improve a measurable impact. This is always such an interesting one with use of technology. People ask to see the impact. They want to know the difference that it's making. And I think that the best way that you can assess that and you can evaluate that is a range of ways. You can obviously you need to look at impact on outcomes on the most dry, dusty level. Look at your data. Look at the impact that has on those pupils. But also it's the having that ongoing dialogue with your pupils and with your teachers. When we did the Chromebook pilot project at Denby, one of the things that we did a lot was we asked the teachers, what difference is this making to teaching and learning? We asked the pupils, what is this allowing you to do that you couldn't do otherwise? And is that constant assessment? You know, technology is never a done deal. Even when you've got a strategy, you can't just implement it and say, oh, that's it. It doesn't need refining. It needs constant refining. It needs constant tinkering with. It needs constantly amending, and that means you have to constantly assess how effective it's being. And I'm a big fan of pilot projects because I think that does give you a chance to try things out beforehand and check the impact. When we did that Chromebook project at Denby, we said if at the end of that 1 year the use of the Chromebooks had not had any impact on teaching and learning and impact on pupil outcomes, then we would have had 30 Chromebooks that went into our resources bank. You know, and you've got to be brave enough to say this might not work, and if it does, fair enough. The investment then at that point is not enormous. It's still substantial but not enormous, and you can use those things in a different way. But the constantly evaluating the impact is really, really important. Don't just expect to look at a spreadsheet and see all the results you want. You've got to get in there. You've got to talk to staff. You've got to talk to pupils.
Absolutely. We're gonna finish up. I've just got one other thing, and it seems to be something that again has come up. I've had a look just on the Twitter feed just now on the hashtag LDeduchat. There seems to be a few questions flying around about the difference between primary and secondary. Regarding, there's a lot of things that will be similar in terms of when you're doing any kind of rollout.
Yeah.
Are there anything, I mean, more to do with the age ranges that we're dealing with? Is there something that's fundamentally different that that would be a key thing, that if you're planning a digital rollout in primary, for example,
Yeah.
As opposed to secondary? Because in secondary, we're thinking about them as little mini adults, and
Yes.
we can give them a good set of instructions, give them some support, and they can normally access things if they've got the resources and the devices available. Primary, is there something that's fundamentally different that you would need to do differently as a leader if you're planning a rollout for a primary school?
I would think about Dallow Primary that's in our trust, and the fantastic teachers that work there. I can just mention a couple of the sort of things that they've had to bear in mind that maybe wouldn't be the same for older pupils. One of them on the most simple level is remembering a username and a password to get in the first place. You know, and to be fair, I've had teachers in secondary say, "Oh no, they can't remember passwords." You know, I mean, I would argue. Remembering passwords, as people go through life, they're going to have to do that in a whole range of things. So actually being able to remember a username and password is important. But if you've got really young early years users, that might not be possible. So one of the things that you need to think about at a most basic level is how they're going to be able to log in and access the platform you're potentially proposing using, because it might be that you need to have a login that involves them drawing something on the screen, or a very, very simple login, or a year group login, for example, that's very, very simple. In terms of their actual skills, once they get onto the devices themselves, I have seen very, very young children use technology more effectively sometimes than some of the older people that I work with. So I certainly wouldn't worry about from the skills point of view, although again, it has to be shown how to be used. And another way I know that some of the teachers at Dallow have been getting around this is they've been doing things like using Google Forms to create quizzes and online little tests for the children, and then they've just been sending out a link so the pupils don't even need to log in to access that. If it goes to mum or dad's phone, they can click on that, and then they can still take part that way, because it's easier for them to get in. So I think you know if you're working in a primary school, you know your pupils, you know their ability level. It is just thinking about things like, and then obviously mapping it to your curriculum, to what you're trying to achieve with this. But certainly I think sometimes we get a bit intimidated actually by how good some of the pupils are, whether they're primary or secondary, at using the technology as opposed to the staff, and we need to not be scared of that and actually go, okay, yes, do not underestimate the younger ones and think they can't do it, because certainly in my experience they absolutely can.
Thank you, Emma. And I think we're going to wrap this up now. So I'm just going to first of all thank you so much for all the effort that you've put in. The session was absolutely brilliant. The questions that have been coming through really on point, and I think we're going to continue the discussion on Twitter as well, which is where you're going to be available. So absolutely. On Chiltern TSA and Emma Darcy will be live on Twitter, trying to tackle as many of the questions and catching up with what's there. So thank you very much for your time, Emma.
Thank you, Al. Thanks.
And Anton in the background as well, that's been answering questions on the Q&A. Thank you very much.
And Simon as well, thank you.
And Simon on Twitter. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That leaves it with me just to wrap up with you regarding things that are coming up and things that we need to do. First of all, I just want to say on Friday we had a competition running during Will Smith's session, and we were giving away 20 books, which were written by Michael Payne, being a CEO. The list of all the winners are actually on the Chiltern TSA Twitter handle feed, and so do have a look there, see who's won there. There are new sessions on Eventbrite. We've added another dozen or so titles. Have a look at those. There's a new link for the Eventbrite. Just on that point there, there's been a little bit of confusion. You will get a notification from Eventbrite regarding that you have got your ticket. But then all subsequent emails from Eventbrite will not carry any Zoom links at all. The Zoom links will come from me via Zoom, and please, they're the ones that you need to follow the links through. Anybody that's bought a ticket will be pre-registered on Zoom. Anybody that hasn't registered on Zoom or on Eventbrite will receive one in terms of registration. And then finally, I just want to say thank you again for giving up your time this morning. Really, really appreciated. The feedback has been immense. The support has been immense. The level of CPD, the 50 or so people that have given up their time freely over the next 2 to 3 months has just been completely overwhelming for me, to be fair. And they have put so much time and effort into it, and I really hope that you're getting a good range of topics to hook into and getting feedback when you need it as well. So I'm going to say goodbye, and don't forget, follow at Chiltern TSA, where the live conversation will continue with Emma Darcy. Adrian Rogers is there. We've got Simon James there. Anton's going to hook in as well, and some of the other Chiltern team as well. And look forward to the next session, Wednesday. Dame Alison Peacock looking at culture shift. Thank you and stay safe.